For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Author and investigative journalist Julian Rademeyer joins me to discuss his book Killing for Profit, which exposes the illegal rhino horn trade. Welcome, Julian.
Thanks.
Now, your book Killing for Profit exposes the illegal rhino horn trade, stretching from South Africa, Zimbabwe and Mozambique to Vietnam and Laos. What made you want to expose this trade, especially considering that you don't consider yourself a conservationist?
I think for me it was a story that started fairly simply. It was an initial investigation. I'd picked up on a short media brief about a South African who'd been arrested in Zimbabwe on poaching charges, and he was described as a farmer in one of the initial stories. And I wanted to try and find out what was this farmer doing in Zimbabwe. It just seemed a little bit bizarre. And the more I dug into that story, we'd found out information about rifles being smuggled across the border into Zimbabwe, being given to poaching gangs there, being fitted with silencers by a gunsmith in South Africa. And it raised, various issues. But I mean, more than that, it sort of, it piqued my interest. Who were the people behind this trade? Who are the poachers? What motivates them? Who are the syndicate bosses? There were a lot of reports at the time about poaching, but it was treated, more as a sort of a conservation issue than a crime issue. And my fascination's always been with the organised crime figures in that sort of situation.
Now, you've mentioned that one aspect was your interest in what draws people into rhino poaching. What did you discover in your investigations? Why they are drawn to that?
Well, I think it's money. It's vast amounts of money. It's worth more than gold, cocaine, and heroin on the black markets in Southeast Asia. And you also have, but it's quite a complex setup because you have poachers from Mozambique, for instance, many of whom live in villages bordering on the Kruger. They're extremely impoverished villages. There are very few opportunities there. Most people who live there come through to South Africa anyway to try and find work in Johannesburg, often menial labour, working on building sites, construction sites. And the syndicate bosses and the middlemen throw around vast amounts of cash, and as a result they have a steady stream of people lining up to go into Kruger and to shoot rhinos there. And then on the other hand, you have people who have become involved in what have become known as pseudo hunts, which are essentially sham hunts, just staged to supply rhino horn to the black markets of Southeast Asia in the guise of trophy hunting.
Do you think that rhino poaching crisis, and it is a crisis because there have been almost 600 poached this year alone, is as much a political issue as a conservation issue?
Oh, most definitely. I think we've tried to make diplomatic or had diplomatic contact with Vietnam. There's been talk for almost a year now about a memorandum of understanding on law enforcement being signed with Vietnam. To date, it hasn't been signed. We've been told it could be signed next month or this month even. But the last time it was due to be signed, the Vietnamese snubbed us. So on that level, I think there needs to be a lot more from a diplomatic effort. Political support for instance, for the Hawks, a very small dedicated team of people who are doing investigations. The same go for SARS investigators. I don't think they have the political support that they need.
Tell us about Chumlong Lemtong Tai, who got a sentence of 40 years for rhino poaching. Do you think the punishment fits the crime, and do you think it might discourage other poachers? I think it's the harshest sentence handed down.
Chumlong Lemtong Tai was involved with essentially a syndicate that operated under a guise of an import-export company called Sesavang Trading, which is based in the tiny country of Laos in Southeast Asia. And this is an organization who are not only involved in rhino horn, they're involved in ivory, poaching elephants for the ivory trade. They're involved in trading in pangolins. I've seen documents, where they've shipped over 100,000 animals, including, snakes, pangolins, etc., across the border from Laos into Vietnam. This is a big operation. They've been on the radar of the Thai police for about the last decade. So I think in that sense, yes, it does fit the crime.
Do you think there will be anything to prevent poachers then from doing it?
I don't think so. I think the biggest problem that we're sitting with is that our law enforcement efforts end where our borders begin. In the case of Sesavang Trading, you've got a syndicate boss in Laos who's extremely well protected. He's politically very well connected. He served in the military there. He worked in state-run industries. He's the chairman of the National Swimming and Boxing committees. He's traveled to Vietnam with the Laotian Prime Minister. Someone like that is completely and utterly untouchable.
How easy was it to get information from these people? They seem to be quite hardened criminals. Did you not feel afraid or threatened at any stage?
I think, I mean, there were nervous moments, definitely, but you approach it, with a degree of caution. I was actually quite surprised at how openly many people did speak to me. And I think part of the reason for that is that, wildlife crime is almost seen as a soft crime. They don't feel that they will be caught. They don't feel threatened in that particular way. So I think that helped a great deal.
Now, finally, do you think there are any solutions to this crisis?
I think that's the million dollar question. Law enforcement is obviously the one angle that one has to look at. How can we extend that beyond our borders? How can we get more international cooperation? I think you also need to look at including people who live in the villages bordering places like Kruger, including them in conservation efforts, making them part of the solution. Somehow they can actually benefit from that. So that's the one option. The other, and probably the most hotly debated issue today, is the question of trade. And I think it's something we should look at. Whether it is the solution remains to be seen. We know very, very little about the markets in Vietnam. It keeps shifting and changing. 1 minute it's rhino horns being sold as a cancer cure, the next minute it's being sold as a hangover cure, then as an aphrodisiac. It keeps changing. We don't know what the demand is. And the other question is, who would you do business with? Would you, and the only people trading in rhino horn at the moment are criminal syndicates who are involved in a range of other activities. If you set up a central selling organization, like the sort of De Beers option, that itself hasn't prevented trade in blood diamonds. So how do you control these things? And then obviously we have the issue of, South Africa, corruption is rife. Vietnam, it's rife. China, it's rife. Those are sort of key issues that need to be dealt with.
Do you think also if people were made aware in Vietnam and Laos that rhino horn has no benefits, that might also help?
There have been some limited educational sort of program attempts. I think the problem with that is that a lot of the demand now is from elites, moneyed elites, who, for them, it's a status symbol. It's gone beyond, just a medicinal cure. There's a case recently of a Vietnamese, the chairman of one of Vietnam's largest banks, who reported the theft of 2 rhino horns from his house. And he had an 800-kilogram stuffed rhino in his house that had been given to him as a housewarming gift. No steps have been taken against him, despite the fact that his possession of those horns or that trophy was completely illegal. It's only the hunter who shot it who is entitled to actually possess it as a personal trophy.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
No, pleasure.
That was Julian Rademeyer, author of Killing for Profit, his book that exposes the illegal rhino horn trade.